Happy to meet you guys, and I'm happy to be here installing my installation just behind these walls, which I will walk you through. And it's an important piece that I have done now the sixth time, called Bakunin's Barricade, and I will tell you the whole story of the piece. Right now we are doing the final adjustments of the work, and if you don't mind, you can follow me and I'll show you and tell you more about it. So we go through the secret door, and the first thing you will see through the doors, you may already start seeing, is a sideways car and a lot of things around it. Let's find out what it is. So when you enter the room, you see parts of it already that is blocking the rest of the room. And what you see here is a lot of parts that normally you would use to make Barricade, and also artworks from the collection of the museum. I think we have 8 artworks from the collection, and also a part of work of one of the other artists in the show, ongoing show, or the show that will be open. And if you want to come closer. So the whole idea starts not now, but in 1849. I heard it as a rumor in an article, and still don't know if it really happened. But according to the story, in 1849, when they were making barricades in Dresden, Mikhail Bakunin, the founder of anarchist movement and thinker, he was living there at the time. He was involved with making barricades with his friends, also including architects and artists and musicians as well at the time, against the Prussian army. So he, while they were making the barricades, he told his friends this idea of including artworks from the National Gallery in Dresden, and that's the part that triggered my interest. And his friends found this idea silly, so this proposal never happened. So he thought it would be a good idea to put the paintings, original paintings from the National Gallery, on top of the barricade. Then when Prussian army approached the barricade, they will maybe not touch or hesitate to damage the artworks, instead of destroying the barricade. So they would gain some time, use the value of the artworks, extreme value of the artworks. And this situation is still the same today in today's museums, and right now we are in one of the largest scale established museum, and it was very important to bring it to life now in Amsterdam. And with the specific collection, selected from the collection of Stedelijk Museum. And in this selection, you can walk around and see specific artworks. This is by Golden, photographic prints, and there's a video piece by Pink the Theory down here. And when you go up, one of the most valuable pieces in the selection is Malevich piece, up there in the middle. And right next to Malevich, you see Katakovitz relief. So every time this work is exhibited, it's the 6th time, and it was exhibited in different scale institutions, but mostly institutions, museums with collections. And Stedelijk Museum has one of the largest collections among the ones that I collaborated with in the past for installing this piece. I think around 60,000, if I'm not wrong, maybe more artworks that are part of Stedelijk Museum. And so of all those works, there could be all kinds of selections, and we have now 8 works that are present from the collection. So there could be, many different highlights. So first idea that comes from Bakunin is the value of the artworks. But collections not only represent the value, they represent many different decision-making over, this is over 100 years and a long period of time by different, directors and people running the museum at a time. So also thinking of Stedelijk Museum, which has a past, it started at the end of 1800s, and some of the works like this one entered as early entry to the collection that was initiated of a group of private collectors, and then it became more like a state initiated collection making and also municipal acquisition. Like this case, this show is very old one, it's not a new one. So like his works also that was an acquisition in 80s within the same framework. And so there are many different elements can affect. So it could have been also a very different selection of artworks, but we kept certain criteria. And now looking at the works, not only the value of the artworks, but other criteria also coming to life here, which is, for instance, violence, and thinking of the idea of Barricade itself. It is a work that also has the idea of violence and how do we deal with the idea of violence in public space, in political way, in psychological way, or even in domestic sphere. This is very important, and also the idea of exile. This museum existing went through 2 world wars, and imagine the collection also went through 2 world wars, and they were not always. Museum was not always the safest place to keep them. They managed to find a way to keep the collection up until this day through different strategies. And right now also there is another parallel museum, which is the storage, which is I think as big as the museum itself, somewhere in Amsterdam, and all those works that are stored, not necessarily on display, but they are there to be on display at some point in the future. So this work is also particularly about future. So it's not only about the works that are often we see on display, but maybe some of the works we don't see often on displays, and maybe we will never see, or maybe they were never been on display. So this question is about present, but also very much about future. How do we imagine, and why do we imagine a replica of a barricade in a white cube space? Your questions really sweating me. Let's go to the other side of the barricade, and I will explain what happens if such work becomes part of the collection. So one very important thing I haven't told you about is the contract that comes with the barricade, and that's what makes it related to link it to the future. And it's not just a simple contract; it's a conceptual contract. So it's the other half of the work, which will be on display in both languages when the show opens. And what is mentioned in this contract to really imagine, not only make an illustration of a barricade, as a symbolic way in the museum, a kind of alternative way of display, but actually imagine it potentially becoming a real barricade in the future under specific conditions. And what are those? What if an uprising in such scale, we see examples in the world happening right here in this country, and the role of institution might change. They need to take another role. What happens to collection? What happens to the role of collection? Is it only going back to the storage to be protected, or it could be performed? So what I was thinking, how do we activate the idea of Bakunin? How do we make the museum ready for a radical moment like that? So we have to define what is this radical conditions, political change that might be happening in the future. And that's the definition of uprising. What is uprising? What kind of motivation behind an uprising? What makes an uprising an international movement, starting locally? How do we imagine, to activate in practical levels? So the contract tells all this story in a shorter way, in a very clear way, and with the creative thinking of museum lawyers as well, that they need to also think like an artist, they need to think like an institution, they need to think like also in the position of all those people who may come and require a piece like that when such moments happens. Right now it doesn't need to be activated, but what if that happens in the future? What if this happens in 50 years when there is completely different leadership at the museum? But what remains same is the cultural heritage that has been carried on. This is a museum existing since very long time, and it will be carried on long term. So who owns the cultural heritage? Museums are the spaces, they make sure this cultural heritage don't disappear. But it is not owned by the museums, although it looks like it's owned by the museum. It's a collective ownership, which also brings collective responsibility together with the public, with its public. The moment you delete and erase the public from cultural institutions, those institutions lose their meaning.